Let's talk about Sony picture profiles. HLG versus Cine4, which one I think is better and why. My name is Damien and welcome to Monkey Picks.
We've got some fresh new young talent doing some things that I know you haven't heard before.
1, 2, 3, listen.
So when it comes to Sony, everybody's wondering about the perfect picture profile. So why did we choose HLG3 and Cine4 as our two main competitors when it comes to picture profile and not something like S-Log? I think in a camera like the A7 III, where you only have a really low bitrate, 8-bit codec, I think a log profile like S-Log3 is way too aggressive, way too hard to expose for run and gun situations, so I wouldn't really use S-Log3 unless you're in a complete controlled environment. And before we get into the nitty-gritty, here are two sequences. The first one is HLG and the second one is Cine4, and they're pretty much similar shots, so you can decide which one you like better. They're both about 45 seconds, and before we start the whole video, I recommend that you watch these two sequences and then we talk about it in detail. So let's go.
Looking back at the good times before it all went down, climbed right up on the hillside, a different view of my life. You left me running on and on, but I don't care, would you let me in? You said goodbye like everything's gone, everything that we could have been. But looking back at the good times before it all went down, climbed right up on the hillside, a different view of my life. You left me running on and on, but I don't care, would you let me in? You said goodbye like everything's gone, everything that we could have been. But
So first of all, let's talk in a little bit more detail about the two picture profiles we chose. The first one is Cine4, which is probably one of the most popular, and in order to get these, we just took the picture profile number 1 and we chose Cine4 and then changed our color profile to Cinema, which is a little flatter than something like Pro, and since I like to have at least a little bit of a flat look, this one is what we had in mind when we wanted to achieve that. As for the second one, that's something I was really excited about because it's somewhat of an HDR hybrid mode, and that is the new HLG3. So in order to get that into our camera, we just chose the picture profile number 10 and changed from HLG to HLG3. And that's pretty much it. We didn't change anything else because that we can do in color grade. And if you go ahead and just change the saturation and everything, it really doesn't give you less or more information unless you really change the color curves and the gamma curves. So this is just something we do in color correction afterwards anyway, so we didn't bother changing anything else. So how did we achieve our grades? We're working with Final Cut Pro 10 for the editing as well as the color correction and color grading process. So everything we did was achieved within Final Cut Pro 10. So we're trying to match the footage to what we think it actually looked like in real life. And that is achieved by just color correcting it, getting it to the right brightness levels, pulling down the shadows, as well as bringing back the saturation. So we get an image that looks somewhat real. The second step is the color grading process. And here we're trying to achieve a stylistic look. So for a corporate video, this is usually more natural, whereas for a horror film, it's definitely a different look than for a rom-com or a travel video. And this is usually achieved by manipulating the colors, the contrast, even more to get this stylish look that we're going for. And if you didn't know already, we make custom LUT packs for specific camera profiles, and we've been waiting for the Sony LUT packs for a long time now because we really wanted to get the best footage and really go into grading, and we didn't have a newer camera with an HLG profile available, and we really wanted to dial that in. So for the grading process, we're using our custom Sony LUT packs that are now available on our website to achieve different kind of look. And the two sequences that I showed you before are completely graded with our new LUT pack. So there's one for Cine4 as well as one for HLG3. So here are our observations about the two color profiles. Cine4 definitely needs a lot more work done in post-production afterwards, as it is much flatter, but it does look a little bit more lifelike. The Cine4 has a little bit of a magenta tint to it, and I feel like they switched from earlier versions from the Sony cameras from a little bit of a green tint to now having a little bit of a magenta tint. The HLG profile, however, is way oversaturated, and also the colors look really vibrant, but they don't really look accurate to us. So for example, in this shot where she's wearing the red dress, the red really doesn't look as it was in real life in the HLG color profile. Of course, we could have toned down the saturation in camera before shooting, but like I mentioned earlier, that really doesn't make a big difference because we have to manipulate the colors afterwards anyway, so it really doesn't make a difference. One thing that really impressed me, and that is one thing I noticed, is that the HLG profile has a lot more dynamic range to offer than the Cine4 profile. Look at this shot, for example, which is graded with the same LUT, but in one shot you can actually see the details in the sky where they're almost completely lost in the other one. And if you look at the before footage, you actually see that even in the before footage, the sky is already lost a little. And we saw that in different shots throughout the test that the HLG profile has far more dynamic range than the Cine4 profile. Also, one thing that at least I noticed is that the highlight roll-off in the HLG profile looks much nicer, and it looks like you're working with a way more expensive camera than we actually did. In the Cine4, as soon as you start grading, I feel like the contrast levels are really harsh and the highlights blow out a lot quicker than on the HLG profile. And the general roll-off from highlights to shadows is just way smoother on the HLG profile. One thing we also noticed is that the HLG profile seems to be a little bit more taxing on your computer when it comes to editing and exporting. We're working with a pretty decent state-of-the-art MacBook Pro right now with an 8-core, the biggest GPU and a lot of RAM. So when editing, we didn't really see a difference. But when it came to exporting the 45-second sequence, which should take around the same time if it was the same color profile, the HLG actually took 25% longer to export. This is just really an unscientific test, but if you have a lesser machine to work with, you might actually see a difference while editing the footage. This is just a guess because obviously we can test it with our computer, but the export times on this 45-second clips should actually show us a direction where the HLG profile seems to be a lot more taxing on your computer than the Cine4 profile. So what's our verdict here? We definitely 100% like the HLG a lot better than the Cine4. And with every shot we took, the HLG looked richer in colors, it had the better dynamic range as well as a much nicer highlight roll-off. Okay guys, let me know, which one did you like better? Which one are you using? Are you still using Cine4 or did you switch to the new HLG, and why? We'll be doing much more tests on color profiles with different cameras and such, so if you're interested in that, consider subscribing, give it a like button, and I'll see you on the next one.